Welcome, everyone, to today's Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment webinar. I'm so glad you could join us. And our session today is entitled Addressing Root Causes and Preventing Breast Cancer, a new toolkit and breast cancer action with a precautionary prevention-oriented approach. My name's Nick Reardon, and I'll be hosting today's CHE Alaska webinar on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics. So as usual, I'm calling in from our office here in Anchorage. We just had some fresh snow, which is always a treat. But these are the traditional and unceded lands of the Dena'ina people. And so I'd like to acknowledge and thank past and present stewards of this incredible place and invite you all to do the same from the many places that you're calling in from and that you call home. So a little bit of background, CHE Alaska, it's a regional partner of a national collaborative on health and the environment. That's the CHE. And so together, CHE and CHE Alaska and other CHE partners, we're working to advance knowledge and action related to links between human health and environmental factors. You can check out and learn more from our websites, akaction.org and healthandenvironment.org. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Alaska Run for Women for their ongoing and generous support of Alaska Community Action on Toxics research, education, and advocacy work pertaining to breast cancer, including today's webinar. So today, the Alaska Run for Women announced the 12 grant recipients for their 2021 annual grant program, and ACAT is so grateful for having been selected. So I'd like to congratulate the other 11 organizations, and something special about these grants is that they're fully funded through participant and donor donations to the Alaska Run for Women. So there's a whole sea of individuals and organizations behind this. And I encourage you all to learn more about this incredible organization. And you can check out the Alaska Run for Women's website for more info about the organization, their events, opportunities to get involved. And they're at akrfw.org. Okay, so our session today will last 1 hour, and we're lucky enough to be joined by 3 guests. First, Dr. Seguinot-Medina, ACAT's Director of Environmental Health, who will help set the scene of how breast cancer impacts Alaskans. Next, Sarah Petras, an environmental health researcher based in the Netherlands, will present on a new environmental links to breast cancer toolkit designed by ACAT as a resource for community health aides throughout the state. And our third guest is Jayla Burton, the program manager at Breast Cancer Action based in California, who will share with us about BCA's work at the intersection of breast cancer and environmental justice. As always, feel free to share your questions using Zoom's Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Type them into the chat box at any time. It doesn't disturb us, and we'll take time at the end of the hour for discussion. So welcome again to all 3 of you, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Sama, please take it away.
Thank you, Nick. Buenos dias, saludos, greetings, good morning from Alaska, the lands of the Dena'ina peoples, like Nick mentioned. My name is Samarys Seguinot-Medina, and it's a pleasure to be here and talking about such an important topic and sharing space with such great guests and supporters and collaborators. Just wanted to share some. I was preparing to do this call. I wanted to go back and look at some of the statistics, and I wanted to share some of the, very briefly, global, US, and Alaska, just so people that are not, don't know the latest statistics, know where breast cancer is at in terms globally, US and Alaska. Globally, breast cancer affects more women than any other type of cancer and is the leading cause of cancer-related death among women. In the US, a US woman's lifetime risk of breast cancer is 1 in 8. African-American communities and African-American women, and I'm sure that Jayla is gonna mention and talk about this more in depth, hopefully. Communities face both the highest exposure and the highest risk, according to data, right, and the statistics. Breast cancer has the highest mortality rate of any cancer in women between the ages of 20 and 59. African-American women have a 31% breast cancer mortality rate, the highest of any US racial or ethnic group. Among women younger than 45, breast cancer incidence is higher among African-American women than white women. Breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed, and this is a statistic about Hispanics. Since I'm Puerto Rican, I wanted to share also another group, a minority group. Breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer among Hispanic women, with an estimated 24,000 cases diagnosed in 2018. In Alaska, breast cancer is the most common cancer diagnosed among Alaska Native women. Similar findings have been observed among other population groups, women of color groups. Like I mentioned, these facts that I just mentioned. The most recent review of breast cancer among Alaska Native women reported an increase in the incidence of 105% during the period of 1974 till 1994. And this, you can find this, and I'm happy to share all the references for this statistics. This last one for Alaska, it comes from the International Journal of Synchropolar Health, and it was a publication of 2019. So I also looked this number because I haven't looked at it recently. The cosmetic industry is an $84 billion industry. And why the burden is put on us? That was my next question when I saw that number. I feel like I'm getting warm and my face is getting red of being upset by this, right? It's so unjust. We as women, especially women of color, deserve better. Education and prevention, and this is why we have these calls, and this is why we're working on this toolkit that Sarah Petras is going to be talking about soon. So we can work on education and prevention because we understand that those are keys to winning this fight. But most importantly, we need our government to step up and provide justice by holding chemical corporations accountable with common sense regulations for testing the safety of many of these chemicals that are added to products that millions of women and girls use. To women who are listening to this call today, we invite you, and we hope that this call and the information we share today and our wonderful guest speakers will share today will inspire you and will provide you support and encouragement to keep fighting this fight. To women who are listening, we invite you to use your voice and tell your story. Demand that these companies stop polluting our bodies and putting our children at risk. We demand environmental justice because we are the women of the earth. We are the child bearers. We are the caregivers and our children's first environment. So just wanted to open up with that. And I don't want to use and take away more time because I'm very excited to hear what Sarah Petras and Jayla has to offer. So I'm going to pass it on to Sarah Petras talking about the amazing toolkit that she's prepared. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sama. Thanks so much for having me here today. Can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. It's really great to be here and to be working with ACAT again. Thanks to all of you for joining the call as well. I'm going to start my slides here. Just bear with me here. Okay.
Looks good.
It's good. Okay, great. I wanted to start with a story about Annie Aloha. Some of you knew her and others may have heard about her. She is the heart and soul behind ACAT and the person who inspired the founding of the organization to continue her legacy. I have to say I'm not the person to tell her story, but I wanted to share a little bit about her because this project is dedicated to her. So Annie Aloha was a respected elder, a breast cancer survivor, a longtime community health aide in her community of Savunga on St. Lawrence Island. After the US military established a base at Northeast Cape on the island during the Cold War era and abandoned it 20 years later in 1972, They left behind a massive amount of hazardous materials on the site, including pesticides, solvents, batteries, PCBs, lead-based paint, and barrels full of oil and fuel, much of it leaking out into the tundra, creeks, and river in areas where traditional hunting and fishing grounds, as well as drinking water sources, were also located. At the time, Annie began to notice cancer among her people, a disease never seen before. She also saw significant increases in low birth weight babies and miscarriages, and she was the first to raise the alarm of the health risks tied to the toxic waste site. For decades, she advocated for cleanup and for the health and justice of her people. Although there is a lot more work to be done to restore the lands and waters at Northeast Cape, the Army Corps of Engineers has done a multi-million-dollar cleanup there, and it's been the most expensive cleanup ever done at a formerly used defense site in Alaska. This would not have been done without Annie's tireless efforts. In 2016, she was inducted into the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame, and you can read her full biography there. For her work, her courage, and commitment, this project is dedicated to Annie. So let's begin. I want to share what we have been working on. At Lake Northeast Cape, there are hundreds of sites all throughout Alaska, toxic waste sites, often in close proximity to Alaska Native communities. And these are local sources of pollution. Alaskans are also exposed to chemicals from global sources. And I won't get too much into this, but it's a topic that ACAT covers in a lot of their work. Industrial pollutants from all over the world are carried north to the Arctic by wind and ocean currents. So Alaskans have kind of a double exposure risk. People also may be exposed to contaminants and chemicals from other local sources like air pollution, contaminated food, using pesticides or local pesticide use, work environments, consumer products, and personal care products, and many other sources. So a major focus of ACAT's work is eliminating unnecessary exposure to these chemicals. And knowledge about these contaminants is one of the ways to reduce and prevent exposure. In Alaska, community health aides are the front line of healthcare in their communities. So this toolkit was developed specifically to train community health aides and can also be used for other healthcare professionals and the people of Alaska to learn about environmental contaminants that are found in the North and the Arctic and that are linked to breast cancer specifically. The toolkit helps health aides determine if a patient may have a health effect from an environmental exposure, and it includes information that health aides can share with patients on chemicals of concern and how to reduce their exposure. I think I skipped ahead by accident. I wanted to share that in the spirit of Annie Aloha, ACAT has continued their collaboration with health aides about health hazards linked to environmental exposures. And ACAT has worked with the community health aid program in the past and continues to offer environmental health training programs in the communities of Alaska. This toolkit was developed by ACAT in partnership with the community health aid program. Health aides will be able to attend training sessions on how to use the toolkit, and the plan is that they will be able to receive continuing education credits for taking the training. So in this project, the goal is to work together to reduce the risk of breast cancer in Alaska and to protect the health of women and men diagnosed with breast cancer. The toolkit contains information on breast cancer, environmental contaminants, and health disparities in Alaska. And it includes fact sheets about cancer-causing and hormone-disrupting chemicals that contaminate the traditional foods, air, water, and land of Alaska Native peoples, as well as household and personal care items. The fact sheets also explore the effects of these chemicals on human health and offer recommendations on how to reduce exposure. Finally, the toolkit also contains an environmental health history tool that helps health aides get a more complete health history by identifying patients' potential exposures to chemicals. This toolkit as a whole and the individual fact sheets will also be available publicly on ACAT's website. So this slide just shows a list of the 10 topics that we have covered in the fact sheets. that's kind of the second half of the toolkit itself, from air pollution to food packaging materials and pesticides to cosmetics. And here I wanted to show you an example of one of the fact sheets so that you can just see what kind of information is included. I wish that we could share the actual final toolkit with you, but it's not quite ready yet. We expect it'll be out in probably a couple weeks or so. So for now, here's an example of one of the fact sheets. This is the one on food packaging, and it explains what some of the chemicals of concern are found in food packaging, like PFAS, phthalates, and BPA. It also has a brief review of the science on how these chemicals are linked to breast cancer and what some of the health effects are. And it suggests ways that people can reduce their exposure to these chemicals. I wanted to note here that many of these chemicals cannot be completely avoided as they're so pervasive in our society, and they're now found throughout the environment as contaminants in our air and our water, in our soil, and even the dust in our homes. So it can't and it shouldn't be up to individuals to try to avoid these chemicals, because in many cases it's not possible. But it takes broader action to protect ourselves and our communities. But that said, there are things that we can do in the meantime to minimize how much we are exposed to. And that's what the back page of the fact sheets cover. How can you minimize the amount of these chemicals that you might be exposed to in your daily life? Oops. Finally, the next part of the toolkit that I wanted to highlight is the environmental health history tool. And the way it works is that in addition to taking a medical history, it's important to check a patient's environmental health history as well in order to determine a correct diagnosis. The reason is that symptoms of environmental exposures may be mistaken for common symptoms of many other diseases and disabilities. For example, headaches, fatigue, upset stomach, nausea. This could, of course, signal many things. So the toolkit has a form that helps health aides ask the right questions to determine if a patient has been exposed to a chemical of concern. Otherwise, you may never know what caused those symptoms. Some of the sample questions are shown here. This is just a brief section that I pulled out. For example, what's the main way that you heat the home or camp where you live now? Do you use pesticides? If so, what type or what are the product names? Where do you keep household cleaners and other chemicals? In essence, taking the environmental health history also makes it easy to know what information a patient might need to understand more about the suspected exposure. So in each section of the form, whether it's chemicals used at home or in the workplace, it references the toolkit fact sheet so that health aides can look for more information on the specific health effects that might be relevant to this patient and how to reduce exposure. They can also give the fact sheets to patients as a handout to take home. And finally, at the end of the toolkit, there's a resource listing, which includes links to additional materials and organizations that are working on breast cancer care, research, advocacy, prevention, and survivorship. I wanted to highlight a couple of them. One of the key resources is a poster that illustrates sources of contaminants found in rural Alaska, and it's pictured here. It also describes measures to reduce exposure. So ACAT has copies of this. You can request a copy or many if you like to display in clinics, in community buildings, schools, offices, even in your home if you like. And another one of the resources I wanted to highlight is there's a link here too. You can click on the slide. There's a documentary featuring an interview with Aloha, where she shares her concerns about the environmental health effects of the toxic waste site at Northeast Cape and calls others to action. It's an extremely powerful video that I highly recommend. So that is all I have for today. I'm really excited to hear from Jayla about the work she's doing at Breast Cancer Action. And I look forward to our discussion in the Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And while I am pulling up my screen to share. Hello, everyone. My name is Jayla Burton. I am the program manager here at Breast Cancer Action. I'm based in San Francisco, California, which is probably really far away from where a lot of you are located, but I'm happy to be here. And then just want to make sure, can you all see my screen? Nick, if you can just.
Yeah, I can see it. It's the full, oh, yep, just the slides now. It looks.
Alrighty. Perfect.
Looks
Perfect.
good.
So I'll get right into it. And thank you so much, Sarah and Sama, for sharing information about what it is that you all are doing. I think it's really empowering to have the tools and resources in our toolbox that we need in order to take action for ourselves individually and also for our communities as well, which is what I'm going to be here to talk a little bit more about today. So I am with Breast Cancer Action, and we have been partnered with ACAP for quite some time now, and they're actually supporting our campaign that's going on this October, which I'll get into a little bit later. But for those of you who are new to our organization or haven't heard of Breast Cancer Action, our mission is to achieve health justice for all people living with and at risk of breast cancer. We are based in, we have roots, deep roots in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we are a national organization. And we were really founded by women that were curious and angry and upset about their diagnosis of breast cancer and wanted to know, why were they being diagnosed? Why is there all of this money going into treatment and care and all of that stuff, but there's not as much as an emphasis on like the root causes. So that is the way that we kind of come into this movement is we do treatment, screening and diagnosis analysis, our critical take of, any new treatment, diagnosis or anything like that that is, there. We see past the hype and give evidence-based information and on, what is good out there, right? We also do challenging the pink ribbon marketing culture. As you know, we're in Breast Cancer Awareness Month, or what is prominently known as Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which comes with a flurry of pink ribbon products, walks, runs, all of those sort of things, which can be really empowering for some individuals that are navigating that. But we want to really make sure that people are also talking the talk, and not just, talk the talk, walk the walk. You're doing everything and not just putting a pink ribbon on something in the name of breast cancer. And then additionally, I think one of our biggest program areas is getting to the root of breast cancer. And we've always wanted to, stop cancer before it starts. And I can get into a little bit of how we do that later. But I think it is also important to understand the realm of which we're approaching these issues at as well. Breast cancer, cancer health in general, is a social justice issue, and it is very political. So in our name, action, we like to take action. We like to call people to be advocates for themselves, and also for the people that they love and care about as well. And so in this, we strive for principled allyship, because we definitely know that there are people in all of these different movements that are working to achieve the goals for their communities. And we really want to take lead and work with them to reach those goals in a very successful and sustainable way. So I won't get too far into that spiel, but so just shifting right into breast cancer in the environment. So Sarah and Sama have beautifully laid out some of the risk factors that are associated with breast cancer. For us, we see, and I think Sama may have touched on this as well, but over half of the women diagnosed with breast cancer in the United States have no known risk factors. So what that tells us is that there's something else bigger here at play. So a woman's lifetime risk for the disease, it used to be 1 in 21, and this was back in 1964. Sama touched on this as well, but it's 2021, and now the lifetime risk is 1 in 8. So that's for me, pretty appalling, considering the amount of money, the amount of effort, amount of energy that has gone into all of these advanced technologies, treatments, and all of that. It's like, so why is the incidence rate higher than it was back in the 60s? We also know that in 2021, there's nearly an estimated case, or there's an estimation of new 200,000 cases of invasive breast cancer in the United States, which is pretty significant. We also know that there is a significant and growing body of evidence that indicates these specific exposures. And I think when looking at that, it's really important to look at, the entirety of the evidence that we have at hand. We know that it is very unethical to do randomized controlled trials and put people in harmful situations and test, oh, if I'm placing this individual in this environment, are they more likely than someone that is in a more healthy environment? That's not really ethical to do. We don't want that. But what we do want is to analyze and trust the science that is out there, that can be in the form of animal studies, that can be in the form of biological studies, et cetera. And also, there's a lot of science that looks at populations over long spans of generations that are in specific environments, that can kind of give us a little bit of a picture of what is going on. And so we know, when looking at this science and looking at the evidence, that we do need fundamental change in how the public and private sectors are approaching, handling and informing people about environmental risk factors when it comes to our health, and specifically breast cancer. So yeah, that is a little bit of this, an umbrella of what is going on, and why we think it's really important to hold our government leaders accountable, corporations accountable, about these unregulated toxic chemicals, and really shift a lot of responsibility from individuals to these large, operating corporations that have the power to make some change in terms of these numbers that we're looking at, if they were to be a little bit more conscious and cognizant of the exposures that are out there. And we, always function from a precautionary principle, which is, the gist of it is, if there's any little bit of inkling that something is going to cause harm, that we need to get rid of it altogether. And kind of going off of, like, I think what Sama was saying earlier about, why we see that the numbers are alarming, but they're even more stratified when we're looking at different racial and ethnic groups, is because, different racial and ethnic groups are exposed to different things, because place really does matter. So I know in California, there is a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure in the Central Valley. And so a lot of the people that are in that community are usually people of color and are usually low income. And so they are bearing the worst, they're hit first and worst by these exposures. And that's just one example of that. And we know, like, all across the world and in the US, there are cancer clusters, where there are populations that have, very high incidence rates of extremely rare cancers as well. So that's why, this work is really important. To go in a little bit further into our fossil fuel work that we're doing, which is only one angle of how we're approaching like the root cause. But as Sama mentioned, and Sarah mentioned, we are exposed through our personal care and cosmetics products that we use, pesticides, agriculture practices such as spraying, et cetera. Fossil fuels is something that we're really deep into right now. So we were the first breast cancer organization to make the connection between fossil fuels and breast cancer, which started with the process of, or exposing the process behind fracking, which is, when you're drilling into the earth to get natural resources. In this process, there are about 700 chemicals that are used when drilling down into the earth, and that can leak into water systems. It can leak into the soil, contaminate people's food supplies. Also, yeah, so and a lot of those chemicals are known carcinogens and endocrine disruptors as well. So I did mention a little bit about what we're doing in the state of California. We're trying to call on our Governor Newsom to phase out fossil fuels completely in our state, which is something that we've been working on for years, and there's small wins along the way, but we will continue in that work. But expanding out from just fracking, right? So we know that fossil fuels, like we are exposed to many different chemicals in the entire fossil fuel continuum. So there's the process of extracting, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, which can be fracking. There's also other mechanisms of extracting natural gases and oils from the earth. Processing and manufacturing, which is, turning what is extracted into some usable form of energy. Products and byproducts, there's like a lot of products that we use, including plastics, including chemicals that we find in our personal care and cosmetics products that are sourced from fossil fuels. And then looking at like what that is with the individual body burden. So that is a lot, that is the core of our getting to the root cause of breast cancer, is like calling out what's really going on in the fossil fuel industry and within this continuum. So that's just a little bit of a prequel to, what we are calling out in terms of this year's Think Before You Pink campaign. We do think knowledge is power, but we definitely want to hold accountable all of the larger systems at play here. So each October, we do our Think Before You Pink campaign, which happens during the month of October. And we have basically for the last 20 years been calling for transparency and accountability from corporations and organizations that participate in pink ribbon marketing. We coined this term pink washer or pink washing, which is used, and I think that's also mentioned in the toolkit that Sarah shared with us. But basically, it is a company or organization that claims to care about breast cancer, whether that's through the use of, using or slapping pink ribbons onto things, but at the same time, they are involved in a practice that may increase the risk of breast cancer, or they sell or market something that increases the risk for disease. So historically, like we've called out, I believe we've called out like Estee Lauder. They had a perfume that they were selling to raise funds for breast cancer, and the perfume had endocrine disrupting chemicals in it. So we called on our members to send them an email, and they actually discontinued that product, which was amazing. So yeah, it's not only about calling for accountability in terms of, some of the policies and regulations from our local, federal, and state governments, but also like some of the corporations that are involved in this as well. So this is one of our largest corporate accountability campaigns. This year, we are, our campaign is called Stop Banking on Breast Cancer. So we are calling on Susan G. Komen, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, to stop banking on breast cancer. Basically, what is going on with this is, so Susan G. Komen and Bank of America have this partnership where they have this pink ribbon banking program. And so the pink ribbon banking program, you can see the cards on the slide here, but it basically uses the goodwill of the breast cancer community to increase Bank of America's profits to further fund fossil fuels. Bank of America is one of the top funders of fossil fuels. And I'll walk through this sort of mapping out this profit cycle with some fun images that we had an artist do for us, which was a part of our campaign. But yeah, so Bank of America is one of the top contributors to the fossil fuel industry. They have pledged through this partnership, they've pledged to donate $1.5 million to Komen between the years of 2021 and 2023. So they've been in partnership together for the last 22 years and raised a total of $10 million through this program and some others as well. The reason that we see this as problematic is because, like I said, Bank of America is also one of the largest supporters of the fossil fuel industry. In 2020 alone, they invested over $4.2 billion into fossil fuel projects. And we know the clear connection between fossil fuels, our health, and fossil fuels and breast cancer. So, which is why we see this as really something that is egregious and that we're raising our voices about. Additionally, just to shed more light on, Bank of America's hand in this, is they finance the controversial tar sands pipeline, also known as Line 3, which runs through Anishinaabe land in Minnesota, and violates the treaty rights of a lot of indigenous people living there, while also exposing them to high levels of air and water pollution. So in addition to that, within that, Bank of America has substantial stock in Ehrenbridge, which is a Canadian pipeline company that was responsible for the 2011 oil spill in Michigan, which was one of the largest oil spills in history, and spilled about 2.8 gallons of oil into the water supply there. And in addition to that, they have clients such as Exxon, BP, Chevron, which are all very active and large players in the fossil fuel industry. So the reason, tying this back to the reason why this matters, is because this partnership that Bank of America has with Susan G. Komen really hamstrings Komen's positioning on being really transparent about the environmental risk factors that we have. And so we have, we love that Komen has this new goal of wanting to decrease breast cancer deaths by 50% in the US come 2026. But we really don't think that this can happen if there is this large and deep relationship with an industry, with a financial institution that has such deep roots in an industry that is like really harmful to our health. And so we have called on Komen throughout this month, and we are definitely inviting you all to join us. I know it is the end of the month, but there is still time. If this issue hits home or makes you feel any type of way, I can definitely drop a link to take action. But yeah, so throughout the month, we've just been asking Susan G. Komen to stop banking on breast cancer and divest from pink washing by dissolving the pink ribbon banking program and really being true to tackling some of the environmental risks that are driving this crisis and epidemic. So that is a little bit about, how Breast Cancer Action views environmental risk factors, especially when it comes to breast cancer, and hopefully shedding a little bit of light on our current campaign that we're doing, plants a seed and shows you all how we are, not only taking the individual responsibility of knowing and being aware of the things that are harmful in our environment, but also making sure that we are shifting that responsibility on to, people and systems and institutions that can make an extreme impact if they were to change the ways in which they operate. So here's more information on, how to keep up with us. We have a ton of info on our website as well. That dives a little bit more into these things. And I'm very interested in looking forward to this new toolkit from ACAT, because I know that there's some powerful information as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you and looking forward to answering anyone's questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jayla. Thanks, Samarys. Thank you, Sama. Those wonderful presentations. We're getting a lot of praise in the chat. And appreciation. And so feel free, anyone, you can write into the chat box or into the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, and we'll see what questions have appeared thus far. I think right off the bat, there's going back to the toolkit and other of these resources, but wondering, so yeah, how do we get access? I think, Sarah, you mentioned that they'll be, the toolkit could be out in another couple of weeks, but where, could you remind us where folks would find it?
Yeah, well, ACAT has the they'll be posting it on the website, I think, and maybe we can share it with the participants of this call. I don't know what the other plan is for disseminating it, but I think, yeah, it will be available to anybody online.
Great.
Yes, yeah, just wanted to add that, like Sarah, it's going to be online. It's going to be free of cost. So, and we'll share it once we have it live and completed and live, we'll share the link with all the participants of this call.
Great.
Thanks. The next question here is wondering, so how is the environmental history information collected by health professionals? And in particular, is it recorded and shared with other health professionals? So is it added to their file or?
Thank you. That's a great question. And thank you, Helen, for the question. So one of the main things that purpose of doing this is to provide scientific information to community health aides that are in the forefront of, talking to patients, in clinics in remote areas in Alaska, throughout Alaska, to provide them with the latest scientific information to educate and help, in the prevention process of many women coming to the clinics with some symptoms. So there's, like Sarah presented, there's a tool, a health assessment. It's a questionnaire, a 2-page questionnaire that is at the end of the toolkit. And so we are, as part of the toolkit and a training that we are coordinating with a community health aid program here in Alaska, in Anchorage, on how to use that assessment. We are working on that now. And actually they could get credit as part of this training. Show them how to use the assessment. It's kept in their files, medical files at the clinics. And we always encourage, if there's concerns and questions that are not addressed by their clinician or health aide, to contact their regional doctor or primary doctor with the information contained in the health assessment and the symptoms.
Thanks, Sama. There's an anonymous question here about, do we know how much of this increase in breast cancer incidence is due to improved screening practices?
It's an excellent question. And I don't know if the other speakers have any input on this. It's a great question and I have to research it because I don't have the answer to that. Very important question to take into account, consider.
I'm trying to remember which organization is working on that. Is it Breast Cancer Action or
yeah,
maybe...
yeah. So I can shed a little bit of light on that. Considering, we are doing this tango in both the environmental health justice world and also making sure people have like very clear understandings about, screening, treatment, and diagnosis. I think one of the important things and that we really value at our organization is, especially in these times, there is a lot of emphasis on getting screened. We think that it is important to know, especially like what's going on in what are your own individual risk factors. I wouldn't necessarily, position screening as the end all be all and like the solution to tackling this. And I feel like a lot of times it is the solution of tackling, some of the risk factors. But again, that is another like thing that puts the responsibility on individuals as opposed to some of the larger things that are at play. So, we think it's really important to, know your individual risk factors in terms of like, if you're living in an area that has a high contamination of PFAS, or, you are living close to where there is a lot of air pollution, or in a cancer cluster, then, and you feel comfortable with like knowing your body and you've talked to your provider about like what your best solution is, that is up to the individual to decide, but I definitely don't think that it will combat a lot of the involuntary things that we are all exposed to, just on different levels, right? So, my exposure to some things may be different based on my place and existence in this world, in comparison to someone else that lives, like I mentioned, in the Central Valley of California, that lives right across the street from an oil drilling well. So yeah, hopefully that gives gives an answer to that question.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Jayla.
and also I wanted to share, because I'm thinking about it, it's an important thing to consider, right, among all the factors. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, I want to share one of the latest bulletins. It's from 2021. It might shed some light also to answer that question. So I'm going to put that in the chat.
Jayla, there's a question here for you. Would you please tell us more about how corporations are pinkwashing during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, specifically marketing products for women of color, women with breast cancer, and companies such as Syngenta that manufacture pesticides and also chemotherapy treatment products?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on that. I'm not really familiar with Syngenta, but I can shed a little bit of background. So National Breast Cancer Awareness Month is probably one of the most successful marketing campaigns in the 20th century. And it was founded and it began by the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, who was also at the time, I'm not sure actually what their involvement is this now, but producing pesticides that were endocrine disrupting as well. And so I guess like during the month of October, like companies will, put pink ribbons on their products, but their products may contain some of those chemicals as well. And I would say, it is a lot of like personal care products that are marketed towards women of color and people of color and women specifically, because we use more personal care and cosmetics products than other genders as well. So yeah, unfortunately, that is what is happening. So we've called on a lot of organizations that are in our history of doing this, we've called on a lot of organizations that were doing that. In addition to like the Estee Lauder example, there was also an orange company. I think it was like Bees Citrus, and they were using wastewater from fracking to water their oranges. And so that is something that we called out as well. So I think it's really about like, we don't want to abolish the pink ribbon or anything like that, because it does provide a lot of comfort for people, but definitely wanting to, make sure that we're being critical about, okay, there's a pink ribbon on this product. What does this actually mean? And there are good companies out there. Not all companies that put pink ribbons on their product are bad, but we're just going to call out the bad ones. But yeah, we do have a tool, and I can drop a link to that tool in our in the chat. But it's things critical questions to ask when deciding if you want to buy a product that has a pink ribbon on it. And sometimes it's just more helpful to they're doing this in the name of fundraising, and sometimes it's more helpful to do your own research and donate to organizations that are aligned with your personal beliefs and values and what you want to see change. So yeah. I hope that was a good enough answer to that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jayla. There's a question that just came in here about, says, endocrine disruptors encompass such a wide range of chemicals. In my experience, sometimes the public find it overwhelming to hear about that all at once. Do you think that when communicating the risks, we should break them down into subcategories, addressing food, addressing personal care products, or altogether might be more impactful? How do you think these risks can be best communicated? And I'll leave that open if any one of you guys want to chime in.
Can you repeat the question, Nick, please?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the last sentence kind of captures it to some degree, but how do you think that these risks from EDCs, from PFAS, from the various chemicals and sources of exposure can be best communicated? And they're wondering, I guess, are there times when it might be better to deal with it as a class of chemicals? Are there other times when it's more clear to say that it's focus in on a specific source of exposure?
And I guess also depends the community, the audience, right? And in our case, and the work that Sarah Petras has been doing with us is the toolkit, right? We understood that that was a successful way to bring this information, education and prevention information, to community health aides who are such in need for this type of training and resources, for example. I'm gonna take the opportunity to answer to, I've been reading the questions and trying to listen at the same time. I saw one question, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Tina Halbig. She asked, can you touch on PFAS work related to breast cancer? And in the toolkit, there's a PFAS fact sheet. That's, PFAS now, it's something that we are listening to it now every day almost in the news, because it is a big issue. Actually, here at ACA, we have a report that came out in 2019, and we were looking at the PFAS in drinking water here in Alaska with significant findings of concern for the people of Alaska and remote Alaska, and here in Anchorage as well. So we have some information about PFAS in relation to breast cancer as well in the toolkit, just so people know.
Thanks, Sama. Yeah, I think some of Jayla mentioned that the place is an important aspect. So I can imagine that, yeah, how this is presented is, it could be very place specific. This toolkit that Sarah and Sama were presenting on is in some ways Alaska focused, and so it would address Alaskan issues, but there's also seems to be overlap in terms of PFAS or EDCs are national, they're global, globally present. Yeah, feel free if you guys see questions in the Q&A that jump out at you. I know that some of the comments that are coming in are describing frustrations around prolonged political or regulatory discussions around what is and isn't safe, or what levels are safe. And I think the frustration is around not adequate action. So these discussions, and then not actually seeing regulations being enforced. If any of you have anything to share with these frustrated listeners, I'm sure they'd appreciate it.
I was just going to add one thing about communicating risks. That I think one thing we tried to do in the toolkit, this particular resource, is that in the past, we've done a lot of fact sheets and information that are chemical based or chemical focused, like, for example, PCBs or PBDEs or something like that. And in the toolkit, it's more focused on product categories. So for me, it feels more accessible. Like when I think about how I would explain what I'm working on, or what the impacts are of these chemicals to my parents, for example, or people not in the field that I'm in, it's easier to say, well, not talk about the chemical name, but say, well, this is used in, in food packaging materials, or in, foam that goes in our furniture, or in upholstery, or whatever. So then it makes it, I think it's easier, it's less abstract. So for me, it brings it home, really. And it's not just we're not just talking about a bunch of chemicals. We're talking about things that people are encountering in their daily lives. So hopefully it makes it more human, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think that hits the nail on the head. Well, there's lots of thanks and appreciation coming in, and I'm seeing lots of resources. If anyone's out there trying to scribble all of these down, I'll add that I'll compile all this, and in terms of sending out a follow-up email, we'll try to include everything that's been shared from our speakers as well as our listeners too.
Yeah, I'm looking at a question from Wendy Prentice. Thank you, Wendy, for your question. Here in Alaska, the state of Alaska follows and has statistics for Alaska. Also, Alaska Native regional corporations have statistics for Alaska. And I'm going to put my email in the chat for people that want to follow up on these questions and want to get written answers. I'm happy to share and answer questions also by email, because I see there's many questions and very good ones. So.
We're nearing the top of the hour here. If any of our guests here, Sarah, Sama, or Jayla, want to have any final remarks or closing remarks to share with us before we bid farewell.
I remember, I think Jayla said that if anyone's interested in an action, that she had something to share. So I think it seems like everyone is very engaged, and I definitely would be willing to and interested in taking some action. So whatever that is, I think you have a captive audience, and hopefully people can feel that they can contribute somehow. And it's still October, so we have time.
Yeah.
And we can always do it in other months too.
Mhm.
Yeah. As we wait for this wonderful tool to come out, I will go ahead. I popped in the chat more information about the campaign, but the link that I'll drop in now is the actual page that you can take action as well. And then I'll also drop my email in case there's anyone that has any further questions that we didn't get to, or would like to partner on anything further. More than happy to do that.
And share the link so we
Yes.
can all take action. I'm going to share with my 4 adult nieces and my aunts and all that. So yeah, share the link with friends and family and colleagues.
And thank you, Jayla and Breast Cancer Action, for all of the work that you do, and also to ACAT for everything, just keeping it all moving forward.
Thank you, Sarah, for creating that amazing toolkit. It's beautiful. I can't wait for us to finalize it. We're in the peer review stage, so the last stage of it, and it's very exciting. I'm sure people are going to be very grateful to have that tool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much to the 3 of you for joining us today and sharing with us. And thanks to the Alaska Run for Women for your support and making this possible. And everyone who could take time out of their day to join us and all the work you're doing. I'll send out an email with links to a recording of this, presentations and conversation, as well as additional related resources that came up during our time together. And thanks, from the representative from Breast Cancer Prevention Partners and their ongoing work as well. It's all really appreciated. I'll say our next call is scheduled for November 11th at 9 a.m. And so we'll be talking with Dr. Carla Ng regarding a recent publication addressing urgent questions for PFAS in the 21st century. And lastly, please donate to support these CHALASCA webinars and ACAT's other efforts. You can give online at akaction.org. And thanks to our speakers for being generous with their time and providing their emails. So reach out to them, but also any additional questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us here at ACAT by phone 907-222-7714. And thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much, you 3. That was great.
Thank you, everybody.
Nick.